So this is not just going to be me and empty chairs here. To my immediate left, we're going to have Everest Bartolo, who is the former Minister for Foreign and European Affairs at Malta. Welcome, sir. So you're going to be sitting over there. Our next guest is somebody whose columns I've been reading for many, many years. I've interviewed him a few times down the line. Maybe he doesn't remember because he was looking down the barrel of the camera. He is a voice of conscience in many ways, and he puts people first. Gideon Levy is from Haaretz. Gideon Levy. Many of you would have been scrolling through your social media feeds in the past 2 months, and you would have come across a Palestinian ambassador who has been so frustrated in many instances at the line of questioning that comes his way as war rages, and what he feels is a double standard and an unfair cornering of him in international media. Well, we're not going to do that. We're going to give him a fair opportunity. The Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Dr. Hussam Zumlat. And the final member of our panel is somebody I've known of since I was a little boy. I am South African, and he was a titan of the legal field in South Africa, and when it comes to international law, with some of the biggest, most contentious conflicts in the world. We have a former judge in international justice and a former special rapporteur when it comes to Israel and the Palestinian territories, Professor John Dugard. Please take a seat. You need help. Okay, so time is always our enemy when it comes to these things. I've done a few of them, and they fly, and it feels like you're in a washing machine sometimes. So there are very many good ways to have these discussions, and I know there are bad ways to have these discussions. One of the bad ways is when the moderator speaks too much. So I'm going to try to speak as little as possible, stay out of the way to allow for dialogue and discussion here. And because we're racing against the clock, I'm going to ask all of you to give each other as much of an opportunity. But as we begin, I'm going to open up with a single question for each one of you as we open up the first round, and after that, we can bounce off each other and continue the discussion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the far left, not politically, just on the just panel. Professor John Dugard, there's a lot of big words being bandied around when it comes to a conflict such as this one, especially in the heatedness and the chaos and the trauma and the emotional aspect of it all right now. Words such as genocide, ethnic cleansing, big words that are weighty and have very specific definitions in international law. I remember Gandhi, when he was asked what he thinks of Western civilization, he said, I think it would be a good idea. And in the context of this war, sometimes you think, if somebody asks, well, what do you think of international law? Perhaps it would be a good idea. Has the international community, Professor Dugard, failed the people in this conflict right now?
Well, let me begin by saying...
Let me help you out here. I'm going to move this closer, and this is bendable and
Yes.
twistable. There you go.
You did comment initially on the subject of international law. And let me say that international law has also failed the international community. But let me begin by making a few brief comments on the international community. First of all, the Security Council has failed dismally, and for that we really need to blame the United States and to some extent the United Kingdom. But the General Assembly is also in part to blame because it certainly could have used its recommendatory powers more widely and more effectively. If one compares the resolutions and recommendations adopted by the General Assembly on apartheid South Africa and on Israel, the comparison is very weak. The General Assembly, for instance, has failed to adopt a resolution recommending an arms embargo against Israel, which I believe is a starting point. And I hope that it will take that action in subsequent resolutions. Then let me also say that another institution that has really failed the international community is the International Criminal Court. In 2014, Palestine became a non-member observer state of the United Nations and became a party to the International Criminal Court, and in 2018 filed a complaint against Israel before the International Criminal Court. In 2021, the International Court found that it has jurisdiction to consider the matter and that it should start investigating the issue. Since then, under the prosecutorship of Karim Khan, who is a British national, the International Criminal Court has deliberately and carefully failed and refused to address the subject of Palestine. I choose my words carefully because it is very clear that Karim Khan has taken a decision not to address the Palestinian issue because he knows that it will offend the principal funders of the International Criminal Court, that is the Western European states, particularly Britain, and of course the United States. And we saw a remarkable incident the other day when Karim Khan received representations from survivors of the October 7 attack. He welcomed them, addressed them sympathetically, and immediately visited Israel and Palestine in order to consider their complaints. So his bias and double standards are very, very clear. And I think one should make it clear this is an institution which should in the first place be addressing the issue of Israel's conduct in the Palestinian territory, and it has failed dismally.
I thank you very much, sir, and we'll no doubt return back to you. It's an interesting segue to Ambassador Zomlot because Professor Dugard mentions the Security Council and blames the US and UK. Of course, they have veto power within the UN Security Council. Then when he talks about international law and perhaps why the ICC, International Court of Justice, etc., are not doing anything, he again identifies the US and UK. You've been ambassador to the US and the UK as well. Do you feel failed by these powers?
Of course, 100%. But before I go to that, let me just comment on the title of today's discussion, Humanitarian Crisis. It is not a humanitarian crisis. There was not a rise in sea level that swamped Gaza and therefore the world need to deal with a humanitarian catastrophe. This was a man-made catastrophe for purely political and national reasons. This is the continuation of the oppression and repression of any Palestinian ability to end the state of illegality that has lasted for a long time. So let's call it something else, Imran. As for your question, yes, the world has failed. because the essence of the rules-based post-World War II international order is premised on three things. The first, war should never be the first option. The second, hence comes the Security Council. The second is that should war be an option, there are rules for these wars. Number three, these wars and these rules should be followed by accountability, i.e. the ICC and the ICJ. In the three counts, Israel has made absolute mockery of these three main provisions of international law. And Israel has not only violated international provisions, it has literally bombed the UN. More UN workers have been killed in Gaza over the last few weeks than in the history of the United Nations. And today, I think, the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, has invoked unprecedentedly Article 99, not only because he, and I think he is, wanting to save Palestinian lives, but also to save himself, to save the order he represents, and to try and to really provide some sort of a comeback after the ruins of the last weeks, but also the many years. Now, and I want to end here. You are all witnessing this global movement, massive movement for Palestine and against Israel and calling for ceasefire. Massive, intense, in London, New York, all over, Brussels, Asia, Africa. Because the people of the world have seen in the last 8 weeks or so that this is not just oppressing the Palestinian people. This is affecting the security and stability of the entire region. This is undermining the very order we built together to sustain global peace and security. This is affecting the very principle of liberal democracies, because now Israel is dragging the West into its immoral abyss, orbit. Now you have legislations in the US and in the UK to curb their own people's ability to protest, to boycott, to use any legitimate or legal mean. So Israel is literally dragging everybody and undermining everything all the way to normalizing, yet again, normalizing the images of mass murder of children, of women, of civilians, the mass destruction of homes, churches, mosques, schools, universities, civil infrastructure. This normalization of these images is also affecting our humanity. And I fear the consequences. And therefore, yes, this is a defining moment. This is a moment that the international system is under huge strain. This is a moment when the people of the world are trying to protect their own values and system. And this is a moment when it has exposed some and magnified others.
Powerful words. Gideon Levy, I'm going to modify my question for you, because I think we can all sort of by now agree that the world system has failed everybody here. The Palestinians in Gaza, the Israeli families of hostages, everybody in the region. It's a failure. And as Ambassador Zomlot said, I mean, Gaza wasn't hit by a tsunami or an earthquake. So in that sense, yes, it's not a humanitarian crisis born out of nothing, out of nowhere. But now, as we talk of this failure, we look at the fact that people want peace, people want justice, people want accountability, how it looks on the road ahead, whether it's 2 states, 1 state, who knows? People want all of these things. But to the point of the humanitarian crisis, the fact that this world system cannot even agree that killing all these people needs to stop, that it cannot agree on a ceasefire. What does that mean to you as an Israeli who often swims against the tide, especially now? I just came back from the region. There's a massive collective trauma since October the 7th. People saying, I used to be liberal and I used to be against the occupation and so on, but after October the 7th, everything changed. One guy told me, after October the 7th, I don't want to hear about Gaza. Nothing. Finished. I was a liberal. I was against Netanyahu. So help me understand from your perspective what that failure means for the Palestinians and the Israelis. Gideon.
Let me, Imran, start with some personal words or emotional words. This session is about to take an hour. In this hour, 4 Palestinian children will be killed in Gaza. Every 15 minutes, there is a child killed in the last 2 months. In this hour, at least 10 Palestinians will be killed in Gaza. At least 20 or 30 or 40 will lose their homes forever. It is now in Gaza 6:10. Children, adults, old people, sick people are looking for a shelter for the night. We have to face it emotionally before anything else, because all those political analyses and appreciations and legal questions are very important. But we have to remember that by the time that we are sitting here, a catastrophe is taking place. I keep on watching the images, and I feel that I was never so ashamed to be an Israeli. I feel that it was never so legitimate to kill children by thousands, to kill adults by 10,000s, and almost remain indifferent. And this leads me to your question. The Israeli public opinion is not exposed to most of it. You'll be amazed to see the Israeli agenda, the Israeli discourse now. TV, all commercials and private. Newspapers, all commercials and private, no censorship, almost no censorship. They are dealing day and night only, but only with the Israeli agony. And there is an Israeli agony. There are hostages, there are 1,200 people who were murdered, there were most probably rapes, there were horrible things with horrible victims who live among us or in Gaza or in cemeteries. But Israel is concentrated only in them. None of the images from Gaza are exposed to an average Israeli. Nothing. 55 years they never showed the occupation, and now they don't show the bloodbath in Gaza, which enable us again, Israelis, to feel what we usually feel. First, we are the victims and the only victims. Secondly, the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world. What do you want from us? We announce the people, we warn the people, go to the south, go to the east, go to the west, go to the sea, go to Rafah, go to Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is the center of Hamas, so we'll destroy Khan Yunis. First it was Gaza, the center of Hamas. We destroyed the city of Gaza. Finally we'll get to Rafah, and maybe we will move to Egyptian Rafah. And the Israelis, as one people, getting united in supporting this war without being exposed at all to the consequences of this war, without caring at all it's what's going on the other side. For many years in Israel, the slogan was, kill the Arabs, and it was the slogan only of the extreme radical right-wingers. This is now an anachronistic slogan, because now it's about killing all the Arabs and not only by the extreme right-wingers. Israel, as you rightly described, got to the conclusion, and especially the Zionist left, that what happened on the 7th changes everything. 55 years of brutal occupation should be tolerated. And the hatred that was grown, was developed under those 55 years is unacceptable. But our hatred after one horrible barbarian attack is legitimate. We have the right now to do whatever we want, because we suffered on Saturday, and yes, we suffered Don't get to all those doubts about how terrible it was on the 7th. Take my word, I was there 2 days after the 7th, Monday the 9th. I saw the bodies, I saw the kibbutzim, I saw the festival, everything I saw. Don't put doubts in it because it was horrible, and putting doubts now just is counterproductive to our struggle for the Palestinians. And this will be my last sentence. It must be possible now to feel the Israeli emotion concerning its sacrifice, and it must be possible at the same time to see what's going on in Gaza, which is 1,000 times worse, and we don't have to compare, but let's remember, it is endless. We don't see the end. Maybe we are just in the beginning. One minister spoke already about the second Nakba. The feeling is that the Nakba is at least at the air. And we all, the international community is condemning, is looking for articles 99 or 98 or 97, and this is going on without anyone stopping it. And believe me, if the international community would have liked to put an end to it, it would have ended today, yesterday. Thank you.
Well, Gideon, thank you. Dr. Everest Bartolo, something that's interesting as Gideon talks about how in the aftermath of October the 7th, Israelis are not exposed to the suffering that's happening in Gaza. They're not being shown images of decimated neighborhoods, bombed out. They're focusing on their very legitimate trauma on families, people who were harmed on October the 7th. You can find a way to contextualize that. But what's the Europeans' excuse and the Americans? What's their excuse when it comes to a green light at all costs, no matter what, to the Netanyahu government? And to tie it to the initial question, and in that failure of being even-handed, especially the politicians, are they incapable or are they unwilling? And if they're unwilling, why?
Well, I think, as we've said, the terrible atrocities of the 7th of October, I would say that the dehumanization of the Palestinians started long, long before. We used to say that the misfortune of Mexico was that it is far from God and close to the United States. In the case of Israel, it's the other way around.
Can you just adjust your mic a little bit?
It's very close to God and even closer to the United States. And that gives Israel the divine self-righteousness and the armament to face it.
Isn't it the same,
United
States and God?
Yes, exactly.
keep all
So
of their
we're talking about the
microphones
same.
live
We're
so they
talking
can
about the
interact?
same. So the point is this, and I was really shocked. An experience I had in July 2021 at the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels, when we had Minister Yair Lapid coming to talk to us. It's very interesting. There's no need for me to tell you that when we discuss Israel and when we discuss Türkiye, there are very different tones. If something has to do with an UN resolution regarding Cyprus, the European Union is ready to be very aggressive and sanctions and talk of condemnation, but when it comes to Israel, no. So I was very struck. Minister Lapid said that in the attacks of the Gaza rockets from Hamas in May, we're talking 2019, at 3 o'clock in the morning, he went to wake up his very severe autistic daughter to take her to a shelter. And he said, while I was doing that, I said, there must be a parent in Gaza who is doing the same, taking his son or his daughter for shelter because of the bombs that are coming from Israel. When it came my turn to speak, I said, I'm really touched by your humanity. But there are some differences. I don't know of any dome over Gaza to protect the Gaza. And I don't think they have many shelters where to go. In September, he went to the United Nations Security Council, and I think the General Assembly, and he repeated the story with one difference. He spoke about his pain, but now he didn't refer to the Palestinian parent with autistic children who have to run away from bombs. We know how autistic children are affected. So the problem is this, that you have, and I think it's not the international community or the United Nations. I think when it comes to the international organizations, we have to be very clear. I like using a proverb. There's a proverb which says, if you have an ugly face, don't blame the mirror. And in the case of the United Nations, the ugly face is not the United Nations. It is the position of the United States for all these years to support Israel and let it do whatever it likes, I think even against the interest of Israel and Israelis. So, you know, it's this problem. And I think also what is happening now is that the United States, that likes to go around the world, you know, dressed in the clothes of human rights and rule of law and, you know, democracy, the emperor has no clothes. The emperor has no clothes. And the EU, interestingly, that the word eunuch servant starts with EU as well. Because in this case, the EU has been totally a eunuch in the harem of the United States policy about this. Until the United States can stop this carnage. Till the United States continues to do that, Israel knows that it can do whatever it likes. And after all, the Palestinians are nothing. They are not human. So, you know, we're not killing humans.
I'm not going to go through chronologically. So, Ambassador Hossan Zomla, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I want to follow on the discussion about Israel and why, you asked a very important question. Why don't we have some sort of a backlash, a movement that would see the other side? And why this has not happened for a long time, 56 years and 75 years since the Nakba? I may suggest there are 4 reasons for this, 4 factors. The first, there is something called the Iron Dome, Jabotinsky. They really believe in the military solutions. It's very embedded. Like, you know, if you stand in the street and you just wave or carry a banner, you are immediately described as an activist, violent, rounded. If you dare take it one level, they immediately target you with a bullet. If you dare do, you know, a stone, they would target you even with more. So the excessive use of violence against the oppressed people is a military doctrine. And the targeting of civilians from 1948, the first Nakba, all the way to the day, is a doctrine. That's number one. Number two, and I think Gideon has touched on this, this is the only military occupation, a repressive colonial occupation, that does believe they are the victims. In a way, you know, the Israeli mindset, and I don't mean here the entire people, it's the establishment, the government and the military. Oh, we have to occupy them. These Palestinians, they make us kill them. They make us kill them. And follow all the statements. The third is some sort of an increasing supremacy all the way to Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And the supremacy would make them believe that they can do as they wish. Who goes and bombs a church or a mosque? Who goes after most of hospitals in Gaza? Except if you have something in your head that suggests that you are exceptional and you can act exceptionally and you can get away with whatever you do, which they have been.
In terms of accountability, sorry to interrupt you. So
And the last one,
Yeah,
the last
okay,
one,
okay.
the last one. which is, it's rather important. To be able to do so, they have really managed to dehumanize us to an extent that there is no guilt associated. And in this process of dehumanization, there is a complete blockage of showing the Israeli public the reality. And this is why it's very important what happened yesterday, showing stripped men, mostly civilian. And that was the first image the Israeli press took from Gaza, not the children killed, not the women killed. And it's a very important conversation because in the end, without changing the public opinion in Israel, it's futile. The whole thing we do is futile. So sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I mean, I want to move this on to the issue of accountability and use the opportunity to ask Professor John Dugard, as the former special rapporteur, as somebody who was in the judge's seat in the International Court of Justice, as somebody who would have observed, and I think you were involved in some capacity when Justice Goldstone had issued his report, consulted at least. After all of that, in previous wars, when we had the lens of international justice on something like this, in with Cast-led 2008, 2009, the Goldstone report comes out and says, okay, Hamas and Islamic Jihad firing rockets on civilian areas. War crimes, these against international law. Israel bombing densely populated civilian areas where half the people are children. War crimes, crimes for which the perpetrators need to be held to account. How come, after all of that, we still see a repeat? Not only a repeat of the war, a war in a more intensified way, far worse, with death tolls that far superseded. Does it tell you that, again, international justice doesn't mean much, even when you take this seriously enough to get a respected judge and get a commission and investigate the aftermath of the war, because Goldstone himself had to retract some of it under a lot of pressure. He was disinvited to his granddaughter's bar mitzvah or something, a bat mitzvah, I think. So even then, the law might not be enough and there's nobody to enforce it. Should we all just give up and, down tools?
Let me correct you. You have omitted an important provision in my CV.
Tell me.
And that is in 2009, I chaired a commission of inquiry established by the League of Arab States to examine the situation in Gaza after Operation Cast-led. And that was a decision or a report that was prepared before the Goldstone report. But the findings of our commission were substantially the same. But let me just share with you an experience I had. At the end of 10 days of very gruesome investigations of the situation in the wake of Operation Cast-led, I said to my commission of 6 members, all of whom were European, no Arab members, what crime are we dealing with now? War crimes or crimes against humanity? And unanimously the answer was no, genocide. And that was in 2009. And I said, but really, this is going a bit too far. The Arab League didn't ask for such a finding, and to say that Israel has committed genocide with all the memories of the Holocaust will be going too far. So we compromised and said it was collective punishment. But I mention this because this has troubled me for many years. And now I've reached a stage when I say without hesitation that Israel has committed multiple war crimes, crimes against humanity, and now I think one has to seriously consider the issue of genocide, because if one looks at the statements made by Israeli officials, cabinet ministers, it's quite clear that there's an incitement to genocide in the sense that there's evidence of an intention to destroy a people in whole or in part. And if one looks at the facts of the Gaza war, one can also infer from the facts that there is an intention to destroy a substantial part of the Palestinian population, and that constitutes the crime of genocide. And so I think one should start to consider the crime of genocide more seriously. But let me just say, before I leave the subject, that we do face a problem today in that the United States, and to a less extent the United Kingdom and some other European states, no longer talk about international law. They say they are bound by something called the rules-based international order, which is essentially the American...
What we say goes. What we say goes.
Yes, it's the American interpretation of international law. And so you find the Americans saying, and the other usual suspects saying, Israel was entitled to use self-defense against Hamas and against the people of Gaza. But this is not a case of self-defense, it's simply an enforcement of the occupation. Hamas is a resistance movement in an occupied state. It is not entitled to use all means of force in order to pursue that resistance, so Hamas has committed crimes in the process. But nevertheless, Hamas must be seen as a resistance movement, and Israel is enforcing the occupation by putting down that movement. It is not engaged in self-defense. Similarly, we'll find that the United States says, oh, well, Israel is committing crimes that involve collateral damage in Gaza. But that's not the way international law goes, that if a state targets a member of a movement such as Hamas, it is not entitled to use all force. It has to act proportionately, and Israel acts completely disproportionately. So the excuse of collateral damage is also ridiculous. But there are many other arguments where one finds that the United States and many Western European states are imposing their interpretation of international law upon the world. And I think that is one of the factors that one has to bear in mind in approaching the attitude of Western states to the whole conflict in Gaza.
I just want just one point of clarification, because this is a privilege to have you on the panel, and that word genocide has a certain gravity. So I want to be clear. Do you feel that it needs to be looked at because there seems to be prima facie evidence that in the movement of people and the bombing of people and telling them to move south and so on, set against the backdrop of all these years of siege and occupation, that genocide must be looked at seriously? Or do you believe, Professor John Dugard, that Israel's committing genocide in Gaza right now?
I believe that it ought to be looked at. You will no doubt be aware of the fact that South Africa and 4 other states have recently referred the question of genocide to the International Criminal Court in the context of the Gazan war. And so this matter is now before the International Criminal Court. But as I said previously, I have no confidence in the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court.
And you believe the system is broken right
to
now?
consider the matter.
Right.
But seriously, genocide is now on the agenda of the international community, and it won't go away.
Something that's just shown up there is a timer. And I don't know if this has been an hour, I have no idea, but it looks like we're racing against the clock here. Gideon Levy, I'm going to go to you next, and then we'll get concluding thoughts from everybody. Again, the Israeli perspective, and maybe it's not just Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and these others, is that, well, even if the occupation ends, that G word, in terms of intentions, is on the other side. They want to destroy us for being a Jewish state. They want to destroy the Jewish state. Again, as an Israeli inside the society against the occupation, wanting the war to stop, what forces are there within the society Or what hope is there within the society for voices to overturn some of the policies of this Netanyahu government?
That's a very bad timing to ask this question. Not that there was a much better time before, but right now the Israeli peace camp or the Zionist left proved what I thought for many years, is that they're totally not solid. Everything breaks them down, everything brings them to the conclusion that there is no partner and that the Palestinians are not human beings. And by the end of the day, we have all to remember that when it comes to the occupation, when it comes to the apartheid, there is almost a wall-to-wall agreement in Israeli society. Don't be wrong about left and right, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Lapid on the other side, and Gantz and Netanyahu, the evil and the Satan. Finally, when it comes to the basic question, are we continuing to govern another people or not? The answer of most of the Israelis will be yes, with all kinds of differences in the rhetorics, in the way they will speak about the future, but basically there will be no difference. And this brings me to tell you, Imran, that don't expect much from Israeli society.
That's depressing.
After 55 years, just let me
Yeah.
explain it. After 55 years or maybe 100 years of occupation, brutality, and apartheid and all this, don't expect the Israelis wake up one morning and look at the window and say, oh, this apartheid is not so nice, this occupation is not so kind, let's put an end to it, why not? This will never happen. It will happen only if Israelis will be taken accountable for the atrocities, and Israelis will be punished for the crimes, and Israelis will have to pay some kind of price which they never paid, or at least they didn't see the linkage between their behavior, their policy, their dehumanization, and their brutality, and their nice, liberal, bourgeois life in Israel while all this is happening.
I'm going to ask for 5 more minutes. I want to try and steal 5 more minutes. Nafisa, I know you're waiting. President of Kosovo is waiting. I know Minkailu wants to evict me right now, but I'm going to ask for 5 more minutes just to get concluding thoughts. We have a certain momentum here, but again, the clock is this big boulder pushing us down here. So whoever wants to go, please. Everest Bartolo.
Yes. 2 years ago, I was in Auschwitz for the Holocaust Memorial. And I was really struck when a survivor stood up and looked at Israeli politicians in the hall and said, do not use us. Do not do unto others what others have done to us. And then another point I'd like to make is about the rule-based order. The United States talks all the time about rules-based order. The rules that it writes, mostly it writes for others. Others have to obey them and not itself. And we must remember that the United States does not recognize the authority of the International Criminal Court, and neither Israel. So the Dutch joke about an act which is called Invade the Hague Act, that the United States has a law that if you take someone into the International Criminal Court who is American, they have a right to come in and free him. So do not expect the United States or Israel to bow to whatever the International Criminal Court does.
We have a Palestinian who grew up in Rafah camp on the panel. Let's give him the final word here.
Well, it's crucial that we stay focused on the situation as it happens. People are being slaughtered, primarily families, children, women, grandparents. People are being starved, and people are being displaced with nowhere to go and nowhere to return to. Not only destroying their homes, but their livelihoods. Israel has been clear, this is a classic design of making Gaza simply unlivable. We need to focus our efforts, all of our efforts, on one thing: immediate, permanent ceasefire of these atrocities, carnage, to garner international will and pressure towards that. And we need to make sure what are our no's. First, no to the ethnic cleansing that is happening at a huge scale in Gaza, but a slower scale in the West Bank. And remember, the same project, the same policies are all over the Palestinian territory, in Jenin, in Nablus, in Khalil, in Jerusalem. So we need to make sure that ethnic cleansing is nothing we are going to revisit in a generation's time. And by the way, Gideon, I still have grandparents or living, and I still have people who remember the Nakba and have gone through what Gaza is going through now. It's much worse than Nakba, much worse than the Nakba. On steroids. This is Nakba on steroids. We need to make sure that there will be no Israeli retaking of any part of Gaza. You want to build buffer zone, build it in your area. We need to make sure that when we go back to discussing peace, we clear that term, because in the last 30 years, peace has become in the heads and conscious of the millions of Palestinians and in the region and worldwide, a word that has been defiled, desecrated, and it now means the continuation, the subjugation, the capitulation. It now means the surrender. We need to make sure that now is the time when we redefine peace. Peace does not mean security to one side. Peace does not mean the continuation of the status quo. Peace is difficult. It is very difficult. It's hard. Ask the South Africans. Ask Northern Ireland. It requires justice. It requires political will. We need a de Klerk here, not just a Mandela. But peace is possible. I believe peace is possible. The one requirement for peace is that it is premised, based on justice. And I think when I see the movement worldwide, when I see the four colors of the Palestinian flag, the red, the white, the green, the black, becoming the symbol of global inequality, becoming the symbol of the fight against injustice, when I see our kufiya, the Palestinian kufiya, the scarf, becoming the cultural symbol and address of everyone who believes in the power of the people to turn all this towards justice, I think we have many sources of hope, my friend. And I believe that what has been taking place in Palestine, tragic, awful, created scars in our humanity, but is turning now into an unstoppable momentum to end this injustice once and for all. Thank you.
I have no more to add. I just want to thank our guests once more, Everest.